know who does.
Good evening, Betty. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I can hear you too. The room looks great. I do have 7 o'clock here, so I am going to go ahead and call to order the Tuesday, June 21st, 2022 regular meeting of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. First, I will hand it over to Manager Centrice Martin so she can let us all know how to best participate in this multi-format meeting environment and do a roll call of the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to members of the board, staff, and the public for joining us this evening for the June 21st regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors. This meeting has been properly advertised in accordance with the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act as a hybrid meeting with the option to attend online using the Zoom telemeeting platform, and the main meeting room has been made available for members of the public to attend in person. If you are joining the Zoom meeting tonight as a member of the public or as an agent to speak on behalf of an agenda item, please say your name, municipality of residence, and the topic you wish to speak on when the chairwoman calls on you. Prior to commencing the meeting, I have a few short procedural items to cover. First, members of the public are asked to remain muted during the meeting to prevent any ambient noise from disrupting the meeting using the Zoom telemeeting platform. If a member of the public is acknowledged by the chair, they may unmute their microphone for their question or comment. Secondly, board members are asked to indicate their name when motioning or seconding a motion so that the minutes may accurately reflect the action taken. Finally, a roll call of the Board of Supervisors will now be taken to ensure that all members can hear and interact using the Zoom meeting platform. Please indicate when you are here when your name is called. Ms. Caldwell?
Here.
Ms. Danini?
Here.
Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Strickland?
Here.
Ms. Williams?
Present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Centrice. I am going to make a motion to amend our agenda. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now prior to citizens' input. I made a bit of an error and did not include a request to Centrice that we include a little time for a few questions to a member of Representative Conklin's office that's going to be present just to answer any questions. So I'm going to make a motion just to pick that item up from the table where we had placed it and put it into unfinished business just for a few moments of questions. I have a few myself. Then that item would be placed again on a future agenda where there will be further time for questions before we would vote. So there's no pressure involved, but I wanted to honor that commitment I had made while also honoring the public being able to join us. So that's a very long-winded intro to say I'm gonna make that motion to pick it up off of the table and place it into unfinished business, first under unfinished business. And do I have a second?
This is Patty, I'll second.
Thank you, Patty. Are there any questions about the motion I just made? Okay, I'll call for a vote then on that motion. All in favor of placing an item just for questions to the representative of Representative Conklin's office on the item previously discussed, the legislation. So on that motion, on that motion to place it first under unfinished business, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously, and thank you all for that moment. Thank you. So first up on our agenda then is citizens input. Is there anyone that would care to comment on any item that is not on the agenda?
Madam Chair, we have one resident in the room.
Thank you. Well, thanks. Yeah, they can go up to the podium, I believe, and let us just know their name and their municipality of residence. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Carl Raup. I live at 2456 Sassafras Court in the Chestnut Ridge development here in Ferguson Township. And
I have maybe lost audio or,
now, I'll start over again. My name's Carl Raup. I live at 2456 Sassafras Court in Chestnut Ridge here in Ferguson Township. And my reason for coming before you this evening is to express, and I hate to say this, but my displeasure with the fact that there's a certain resident in the township that lives about a half a mile away from me as the crow flies, who can indiscriminately shoot off his fireworks on any given evening at no particular time for as long as he desires, without regard for the impact that this has on anyone that lives within several miles of his property. As it specifically relates to me, I have a 12-year-old dog. I was going to bring him with me, but I thought better of that. And when the fireworks go off, he does everything from pace to hide under furniture to urinate on the floor. And I know that from hearing other people talk about this, they have the same issues. I apologize, but I don't know if the township requires a permit to shoot off fireworks, but my suggestion would be two things. Number one, if you don't, that you should require a permit to shoot off fireworks. And as part of that permit process, I suggest that the person who is the permittee would be required to alert the neighbors of the impending fireworks. Saybrook and Chestnut Ridge both have websites where this person could send out a notice that at a certain time there's going to be fireworks, so we could give our dogs Dramamine or something. That's my only reason for being here. Other than that, I think that the township's doing a phenomenal job, and I applaud everything else that's going on. If you could take care of this, I'd be done.
Thank you so much. I would also be curious to know if we require permits. We have a noise ordinance, but it doesn't explicitly state anything about fireworks. I know the state is grappling with their own legislation that really allowed a lot more use of fireworks, and they're thinking of reeling some of that in. I don't know how far they've got with that, but I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer or knows any particular information. I have also heard about this, I believe, about this particular situation.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Laura, and maybe somebody from Representative Conklin's office can help me with this, but I think we are preempted from making any regulations about fireworks. I think that's one of those preempted issues.
Yeah, I guess at some point it kind of becomes disorderly conduct, though, because like if somebody is lighting off fireworks in their backyard at 2 o'clock in the morning, it sort of seems like it's not about the fireworks anymore. But this person isn't really talking about that particular situation. So again, like I'm really out of my depth on this, but
Yeah.
I have heard this complaint kind of thing, and it's definitely an issue. So
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So-
I'll just share, we do have a noise permit process, and we have an application that's available online. And for noise that would extend beyond what's described in our noise ordinance, which I will yield to Chief to better elaborate and inform. And I'm happy to answer any questions after Chief provides a little bit more detail. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I mean, I understand fireworks for the 4th of July and things like that, but June 13th at 8:13 at night, I'm not quite sure what the celebration was. So,
Right.
yeah, thank you. Chief, do you have
Okay,
any?
and that's it for me. The gentleman in question did obtain a noise permit from the township.
Okay,
He notified adjacent property owners. I notified the Saybrook Homeowners Association and Greenleaf Manor Homeowners Association. I think Chestnut Ridge, we were looking for somebody, and quite honestly, I can't remember if we did notify. If he said we didn't make notification, I'll agree with that. But one of the things that Centrise and I are working on is, potentially creating a email group with grantees permits. And one of the problems is sometimes, how do you get that information out to people? So one of the things we're looking at is creating sort of like an email group that if somebody wants notification about special event, noise permits, something along that line, that they can sign up for that email group, that when we get something like this, that they will receive an email and, have that advanced notification.
Thanks. That's, yeah, like the neighborhoods that you're talking about, that's like a pretty widely dispersed set of effects of that particular thing. So I think it seems different than granting a noise permit for something that's going to have like just a one street or two street kind of effect. Because the fireworks themselves, again, just going back to that and not to draw it out or anything, that's a particular noise that's very loud and widespread. And also, yeah, slightly preempted by the state, and certainly something we could follow up with Conklin. But thanks for that information, because I think that tool would be helpful, I guess, at least in preparing to brace yourself for that kind of a really invasive, loud noise.
And that's what, part of this process is. They were commercial grade fireworks. So he has to make notification to code and fire as well. And he has to make notifications to adjacent property owners because of fallout distances and different things. So I was going to say, so he followed those rules, but just as you said, I mean, it does definitely impact, more than just, that surrounding area. And
Yeah.
now we really don't have anything like College Township has, some ordinances related to fireworks at the baseball field. And, they have procedures set up in place. So, I said that's something that we don't really have in that end.
Mm-hmm. I know, I'm pretty sure I remember when we adjusted the fire safety ordinance that we added in a prohibition of fireworks during red flag drought time. So if somebody were to apply for a permit during that time, purportedly, is that the right word? I think it would be denied.
Yeah.
So there is that also safety in place. So I guess wish for drought if you don't like noise. It's bad. All right. So thank you for bringing that to our table, something to think about and follow, and then maybe mention to Conklin's office. And thanks staff for what you're doing there.
Madam Chair, I think
Any
we have
other citizen input?
I'm sorry, I think we have some maybe additional information from Representative Conklin's office, possibly.
Oh,
That's what that is.
I'll be quick because nothing's actually moving. There's been no votes yet, but there are two bills out there that would actually address this issue, and I would encourage advocacy on both for any members of the community interested in impacting this. Representative Schweier has a bill in Agricultural Committee, which would repeal the fireworks law, which would help with the preemption issues. And that's House Bill 988. And in addition to that, we have House Bill 1628, which is by Representative Freeman out of Easton, and that's in local government, and that allows municipal regulation of fireworks. So either one of those bills would actually address this issue, but neither has had a vote yet this session. So advocacy to the majority for a vote would be helpful on that.
thanks. Thank you. I'm such a Debbie Downer. I'm like, how likely is it? But that's, yeah, okay, let's advocate for it. Okay, any other citizens input? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to approval of the minutes. We have, for approval, I'll entertain a motion to approve the June 7th regular meeting minutes and the June 14th work session meeting minutes. I'm sorry, are there any corrections before I entertain that? Okay, I'll entertain that motion.
This is Sierra, so moved. Well, I move that we accept the June 7th regular meeting minutes and the June 14th work session minutes.
Thanks.
This is Patty, I'll second.
Great. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. And we are on to authorities, boards, and commission reports. This evening, we have the University Area Joint Authority Report. And is Mr. Kunkel with us this evening in the room?
Mr. Kunkel is not here with us, so he did submit the report, and as the other
Yep.
representative to AJA, I can answer any questions possibly, or add. The report was pretty thorough, and there hadn't been a lot of movement on a lot of these things that we had heard about before, so.
Thank you. Any questions for Lisa? Okay, thank you.
I will point out the sheep.
I'm sorry?
I will point out the sheep in case anybody didn't have a chance to read it yet. They are looking into having sheep under the solar array. to be
Oh.
Eating the grass underneath there. So that would be the highlight
Okay.
of the report, I think.
Is that
In
like
case
a
anybody
Penn
missed
State
it.
project? Ag project? Or is it all UAJ?
I think
They're
it's
quite
all
creative.
UAJA, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was a Penn State involvement, but I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
'Cause they're on UAJA
That's-
property,
That's
so.
good, good. Well, you know, that place where they have those panels was a horse farm before it was a UAJ property. So the barn is gone, so the sheep are there. So why not? Great, great. Moving on to special reports. Tonight, we have no reports noted, but should we just make a mention that today was the Community Diversity Group one-day conference, and it was great. Wonderful presentations, speakers, food, also wonderful food, company, and Supervisor Williams was a presenter there. I was late and missed the presentation, but I heard rave reviews. So just wanted to give a shout out to all the organizers, presenters, attendees. It was really, again, great. It was a great one-day conference. So look forward to next year already. So I just thought I'd share that during this time. Anyone else care to share anything about it? I mean, it was really good. I kind of want to keep talking about it, but all right. Okay, we'll move on. Let's see, we're through special reports and on to COG and regional committee reports. We've got COG committee reports, climate action and sustainability committee. Hillary, you're up.
Alrighty. So everything in the agenda that was laid out, it's pretty detailed and comprehensive. Just a few things that I would love to flag. The new round of the technical advisory group had their first meeting at the beginning of June. Brandy Robinson, who Ferguson Township is very familiar with, she was elected as chair, and Jasmine Fields, who is the State College Borough Sustainability Program Officer, is the vice chair. Just to keep everybody updated, we did rescind the motion to ask the COG General Forum for the endorsement calling on U.S. Congress to enact the Energy, Innovation, and Carbon Dividend Act, feeling as though trying to endorse federal legislation without actually reaching consensus within the municipalities doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we could instead refocus a little bit more internally, focus on the municipalities and on our state legislators to do some research and look for things that might be moving through the House or the state Senate that would be, that might align with those values. The update for the Center Region Comprehensive Plan for CRPA, CCMPO, and Refuse and Recycling is going to be completed by the end of 2023. And some updates to the Refuse and Recycling 2023 program plan include budget updates from 2022, including shifts for 2023. One of the, I think, for me, like one of the more exciting things is to seek potential grants from the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then we are moving forward with the ICLEI grant as one of the 8 finalists through the Home Foundation, which is an applicable 501c3. The COG had tried to apply for that, but because it's a council of governments and not a 501c3, I think there were a little bit of like bureaucratic red tape issues. So those are, oh, and then, sorry, last thing. Pam Adams and the folks who have been working on this have created a really incredible dashboard for the municipalities to use, just for all of us to have like a general layout of like what's been accomplished, what different municipalities have focused on or are working towards in terms of different sustainable efforts. And I will be dropping that through email to board members and staff shortly. That's it.
That's great. I love that excuse me, that dashboard concept to follow things. It's really super helpful. Any questions for Hillary? All right. Agenda. Public Safety Committee. Patty.
My report is in the agenda, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Patty? Thanks, Patty. Facilities, Patty again.
Again, my report is in the agenda, and if anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them.
How is Whitehall Road Regional Park going?
So far, so good. I believe that the pads have been poured for parking, and they started the construction of the restroom facility, etc.
Wow.
And they talked about the seating for fields won't be happening until the fall but that was about it other than that.
Fall is really soon. Yeah, so, okay. All right, thanks. Any other questions? All right. Finance Committee, the cancellation notice included. Yep, we rarely cancel, but did. So, questions? All right. No other committee reports? And we're on to staff reports. First up is the manager. Ms. Martin, would you care to highlight anything?
No, Madam Chair, provided with the agenda is a copy of the written report. I'm happy to answer any questions if board members have questions.
Questions for Centrise? All right, seeing none. Any other questions for any other staff members that are contributing reports today?
Screen.
I see it, Lisa. Lisa.
I'm looking at my little square within a square up there. Just a question for Chief Albright. I noted in the report that you noted how speeding was a continuing priority and a concern. I was wondering if you had any areas that you wanted to highlight to us.
Our biggest areas, continue to roughly be about the same. It's Whitehall Road, Pine Grove Mills. And interestingly enough, not only is rush hour, some of the peak hours, but lunch. Lunch is one of the big times that we have speeding. I don't know whether it's somebody hurrying to get home or try to get their lunch. Having our radar signs and being able to collect that data makes, our enforcement efforts a little bit more efficient, because we can target those specific times and, hopefully slow people down. But yeah, our biggest problems with speeds are Whitehall, College Avenue, Pine Grove Mills. As I said, we even have a couple residential areas that, we've had signs out and we're able to capture some data and, lead us to some traffic enforcement.
Thank you.
And you'll also notice in my report too, one of the other big things that we've seen an increase so far this year is crashes. I think that's region wide. I know we've seen a lot of crashes, throughout the county with fatal. But I said we've seen a bigger number of crashes. It's nothing overly consistent. You can say you can focus on one intersection, whether it's stop signs or red lights. Some of it is inattentive driving, where sometimes people are drifting into the other lane, or quite frankly, I really have no explanation for some of the other accidents that we see.
Thanks for that. And I think just knowing the recent accidents we've had between cyclists and vehicles and the skateboarder, and that's always something that we're trying to emphasize is awareness and education and safety. And so, I appreciate you guys. I feel like there's a lot of communication that comes from the police department and from the township to remind people to be aware and concentrate when they're out doing these activities and driving. And so I guess it's just another reminder.
And I mean, for bike safety, I think, the two big takeaways on bike safety is, lighting, making sure that you have, lighting not only to the front or the back. Some of it may not be required, but just for safety's sake, it's good to have that stuff, wearing the proper, safety gear, helmets. And then also, I mean, we see it an awful lot is, bicyclists disregarding stop signs. And, that's been some of the issues that we've seen with some of the accidents.
And that's a communication I have later to share too in the meeting. Chief, do you know if you have any of the lights left for bicycles? I feel like we had some.
We have, I think we have we initially got 75 of them, and we're down to about 20 right now. So I've been working with Matt Cox from Center Rides, and he has more ordered, but just like everybody else, the supply chain issues are slowing that order down for us. But as I said, we've handed out a good amount, and I'm pretty happy about that.
And those are available here at the township office?
Yep.
I think people can just
Yep.
come in and pick one up.
Yep, and not only at the township office, but if we have an event, like we had the fire safety event a couple weeks back, not only did I have some those lights out, but I also had a couple of gun locks out too that people were able to come and take.
Thank you so much for doing that. Thanks for spending a few minutes on that.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're on to unfinished business. And first up, we have added an item to the agenda that a representative of Representative Conklin's office is here to answer any questions to follow up from our previous conversation, whereupon we had some questions about the pending, I guess it's technically pending now, legislation about domestic violence offenders and public service. So with that, I believe the representative is in the township building.
Yes, that's correct, Madam Chair.
Fantastic. If they might want to just step up and introduce themselves, and then we can kind of take any questions from there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Giannini. My name is Josh Portney, and I am the local government liaison for Representative Scott Conklin's office. I'm actually going to be later introducing Nick Heimball. He's going to be the one answering the questions. I'm just going to preview it, if that's okay with you, Chair. Is that all right?
Sure.
Thank you so much. And Rep. Conklin wishes he could be here, but Harrisburg's in full budget season right now, and so because he's a chairman of a Democratic chairman of a leader committee, he has to be there, as a part of the budget talks. So earlier this year, the same support resolution that you guys are considering tonight passed unanimously via a vote of the Center County Board of Commissioners. And it's my hope that soon, I don't know when, but soon, the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors, after questions, can join the county commissioners in their support. This bill, House Bill 2596, which we'll address later, addresses an issue that is personal to Representative Conklin, as I'm sure you'll remember from his comments in the May meeting. It seeks to solve an issue that some victims of domestic violence face, seeing their own domestic abusers get ahead in society after their abusers have really much evaded a big penalty or a court hearing. Over a 5-year period, a recent 5-year period in Pennsylvania, according to Fox Rothschild LLP legal research, less than half of domestic violence cases actually proceed beyond the procedural preliminary hearings. This means that abusers can continue on in society with their records merely scratched, and they can even serve the public. The research that done by that law firm partially attributes this phenomenon to the fact that in 88% of those cases, the judge simply grants a temporary restraining order, or PFA, before the case is proceeded to full trial. The other part of the reason that the research suggests is that many victims are too afraid of bringing this to a full trial. 20% of those cases in that 5-year period in Pennsylvania saw the petitioner, the victim in the case, withdraw before the preliminary hearing or before the trial. So knowing that domestic violence touches nearly 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men throughout their lifetimes, I'm glad that my boss, Representative Conklin, introduced a bill to prevent abusers from serving in government while their victims hide in the shadows. Last time the board discussed this, it appeared that some supervisors had some questions, and for that, I'd like to introduce Nick Hanball, who was actually here before. He didn't introduce himself. He was a little just rushed up to answer the question about fireworks and state preemptions, but he is actually the Democratic Executive Director of the House State Government Committee, of which Rep. Conklin is the Democratic Chair. And you've already seen his legislative experience, and it's quite extensive, starting with he was the Deputy Chief of Staff for then State Representative Brendan Boyle from 2011 to 2014. When Rep. Boyle was actually elected to Congress, he went with him to Washington, and he was the district office director for Congressman Boyle in the 4 offices throughout his very large district, 13th. Nick was a senior policy advisor to the congressman, advising him on legislation, constituent input, stakeholder positions, and community goings-on in the 13th district. In early 2019, Nick moved back to Harrisburg, where he's been using that legislative experience in his role as the Democratic Executive Director for that very influential House State Government Committee. And he just came into town after, like I said, it's budget season. He was on the floor and helping to answer questions that I hope he'll do now. So he's really well equipped to answer the questions you guys may have about this. So without further ado, here's Nick Hanball. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board of Supervisors.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Portney. Yes. Before I do board members mind if we let, I believe it's Nick, just, Nick, do you have a few words you want to say? Is it Nick? Before I go on.
Yeah, Nick's fine. And I can go over the bill in brief and then answer questions if that works.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I'd be happy to go over the bill in brief and then answer any questions you may have.
Okay, that's my preference. Board members, though, I see your hands are up. Did you have something you wanted to say before we have Nick just go over the bill and then we go to questions? Okay, sorry. Okay, please, Nick, take it from here. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for having me speak today. It's not often I get to address a Township Board of Supervisors or members of a community. I'm often in front of a room full of members in caucus or on the floor, but don't get to speak to the community as much as I used to when I was in Congress. So it's a lot of fun for me, and thank you very much for having me out to answer questions. Without further ado, House Bill 2596 by Representative Conklin, Chairman Conklin of the State Government Committee, amends the Pennsylvania Constitution to restrict any individual who's been sentenced for domestic violence from holding certain legislative, executive, or judicial offices. Now, this is a constitutional amendment with 4 distinct articles, and just to preface that, constitutional amendments go through a unique process in Pennsylvania. It's one of the only times that voters and citizens like the people watching today actually get to vote directly on legislation rather than through their members of the legislature. So this legislation would have to pass the legislature twice, both the House and the Senate, through 2 consecutive terms. And after that point, as a constitutional amendment, it would go to the ballot for a vote. And voters would vote on it during the next election, which follows that final second passage of the bill. And if voters approved it, it would become law. It's by nature very difficult to amend the Pennsylvania Constitution because changes made there are constitutional. Those are constitutional rights that we're giving people or taking away from people, and so it's not something to be done lightly. This legislation does have, as I said, 4 distinct articles, and it would also require that the General Assembly define physical or sexual abuse for use in any of these 4 amendments within 2 years of passage. So while the constitutional amendment itself does establish some precedent, the guardrails are set by the legislature afterwards. First of all, it has Article 2, Section 7, which would add that physical and sexual abuse by a family or household member would exclude you from serving in the General Assembly. Article 4, Section 5 would hold the same for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Article 5, Section 12 would hold the same for justices, judges, or justices of the peace, which would be peace officers or police officers. And finally, Section 6, Article 2 would hold the same for civil officers. And there is a definition for family or household member in the bill. It's defined as a spouse or person who has been a spouse, a person living as a spouse, or who has lived as a spouse, a parent and a child, other persons related by consanguinity or affinity, a current or former sexual or intimate partner, or a person who shares biological parenthood. All of those would fall under family or household member. And as I said, it would be effective after passing twice and going to voters and passing finally. I guess I'll stop there and pause for questions if that works.
Thank you so much. Let's go to questions. We have two hands up. Questions. Hillary, I think maybe your hand was first. Let's go to you.
Sure. First of all, thank you both representatives from Representative Conklin's office for being here tonight to further go into detail about this bill. I am sure that there will be further questions in terms of restorative justice and how that relates to this bill, but I have a couple of, I promise they are related questions because I think it all ties together. As an advocate for survivors of domestic abuse, I'm sure that Representative Conklin is aware that, as stated pretty succinctly in a City of Philadelphia's article from their Office of Domestic Violence Strategies, bodily autonomy is critical for survivors of abuse, especially if they have experienced reproductive coercion. However, as of 2018, Representative Conklin had a 40% approval rating from Planned Parenthood. Has that rating changed?
I can't really speak to politics, so I can answer any questions related to state government or state government committee. But to my knowledge, Representative Conklin has never taken a bad vote on that issue. But again, I'm not an expert on Representative Conklin's record. I work for leadership and for the committee, and so I'm more of an expert on committee legislation.
Sure. Follow-up question, and if Mr. Portney, who does work in Representative Conklin's office, is able to answer that, that's great. Also don't want to put him on the spot. What actionable plans or legislation does Representative Conklin have in terms of providing legal, safe, and accessible abortions to those wishing to terminate a pregnancy?
I can't speak to that either. I mean, I don't have a list of everything he's co-sponsored, but I do know Representative Conklin is supportive of such legislation. And if you have a specific bill number, I would be happy to check his co-sponsorship on that and ensure that he is a co-sponsor. Also, I'll just mention, I'd be happy to share my email address to the public. And if anybody has specific questions on the rep's record, I'm happy to look up his record on specific bills when I get back to the office. It's just nheimbaugh, HIMEBAUGH, @pahouse.net. Please email me, and I'm more than happy to look into that for you. Especially if you have specific bills that you'd like him to co-sponsor, I can make certain that he's on there.
Sure. And then just last question before I'm turning this over to Ms. Williams. Just in terms of looking at sort of a slippery slope argument, again, in terms of restorative justice, why is this abuse only limited to, quote, end quote, a family or household member?
So we have to be really careful when we're amending the state constitution that we don't make things too broad. That said, definitions can be changed by the General Assembly subsequently, but making legislation too broad could result in situations in which individuals convicted of less serious crimes that may not merit them no longer being eligible to serve in office would no longer be eligible to serve in office. It is important to note that you're already ineligible to serve if you're a felon. So this only applies to lesser offenses below a felony, and in this case, domestic violence. That said, I'm sure that there are other crimes below a felony and other than domestic violence or domestic abuse that would be worthy of disqualification for serving. And to that note, we have been looking for other possible legislation that we can do, and we're definitely open to suggestions if you have one.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tira.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, and I do have a comment. I guess my first question is, what does this bill actually do for women who've been abused?
Sure. So any woman who's been abused would not have to see their abuser serve as their elected official. I mean, when we vote for people to represent us in a representative democracy, those people are casting votes on behalf of their citizens. And going and seeing someone sending you mail, seeing them on TV, seeing them on the House floor, and knowing that that person abused you must be really painful. And something that we'd really like to avoid women having to go through. So as soon as this legislation became law, anybody currently serving would immediately be outed as having been a domestic abuser because they would no longer be eligible to serve. And any subsequent people who wanted to serve would not be eligible until they had their record expunged. So this would prevent those people appearing on TV and appearing in their mailbox on a regular basis and causing them further grief for sure.
Okay, I guess that's an answer to the question. Okay, I'm sorry that.
I'll add to that. I mean, as a constitutional amendment, and in general, most laws tend to penalize after the fact. Very few laws can actually address things prior to the fact. And it is a big issue that there are no laws on the book that really prevent domestic violence from happening in the first place. Our laws, the penalties that are in Title 18 and elsewhere in our Constitution and in our state laws, penalize people after the fact. So it really is a big issue that it's difficult to prevent domestic violence from happening in the first place, and I can see where you're going there.
Why is the clause of the record being expunged or pardoned a part of this bill?
So it's actually not.
Why doesn't it matter if this person has just completed their sentence and served their time? Why does the additional aspect of the pardon or expungement have to be on top of this?
So anybody convicted would be ineligible. Once you're convicted, that's on your record, and it doesn't go away unless you had an expungement. So you would have to have an expungement in order to get that off your record and be eligible. The same applies for a felony. Currently under the law, if you're a felon, you're ineligible to serve in public office in Pennsylvania. If you were to have an expungement, you would then be eligible to serve. I do not believe a pardon actually works. It has to be an expungement. That said, the same applies for if you have your conviction overturned. My mother's a civil rights attorney. She does prisoner civil rights as her primary practice, police misconduct and other things of that nature. And if somebody has their conviction overturned through something like a post-conviction relief appeal, a PCRA appeal, because that conviction has been overturned, it's as if they were never convicted in the first place. They would then be eligible to serve. It would actually be unconstitutional in the U.S. Constitution to hold them liable for crimes that they've been cleared of.
So in essence, you're saying you want to hold all crimes of domestic violence to the same level as a felony?
I'm saying that just like we don't want felons serving in public office, I think it's just as painful for domestic abusers to serve in public office, even if that domestic abuse didn't rise to the level of felony. And there's plenty of egregious domestic abuse that does not, unfortunately, rise to that level.
Okay, I think I'll have another question in a second, but I do want to make the statement that someone from your office, and I won't say their name, made the comment that this bill was going to be easy to pass because we were a board of all women. And I just want to say how sexist that was in essence. And I don't approve of that statement at all. Just because we're women doesn't mean we would necessarily approve of it. And some of us have sons. So I just think that that's just an interesting statement just to flat out make. And I just want to say it did come from your office.
Very upset to hear that. Well, I'm not the representative.
Let me say that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the representative. I did give you my email. Please email me that information, and I'll speak to the representative on your behalf. That's very alarming. I mean, domestic violence affects everybody, not just women, as we just found out through the much TV serialized Johnny Depp trials. But beyond that, I think it's important to cast a broad net when we're looking at domestic violence and domestic abusers. It's definitely not specific to women, and I don't think any constitutional amendment's easy to pass. I think anybody saying anything is easy to pass in the state legislature has never been to Harrisburg, but certainly a constitutional amendment is the most difficult piece of law to make law because it does have to pass twice and then go to voters versus just passing once and going to the governor's desk. So it's never easy to pass any bill in Harrisburg, much less a Democratic bill, much less a constitutional amendment. In terms of this board, I don't think it's an easy ask for any board. I think a lot of consideration has to be made when endorsing legislation. You have to really make sure that it's legislation that members of your community would approve of, since you as representatives of elected democracy represent your constituents. So I don't think it's ever easy, whether it's at the local level or in Harrisburg. And I'm alarmed to hear about those comments, and please email me and I will be sure to speak to Chairman Conklin immediately.
Yes, I just want to say before I know Hillary has her hand up, the issue I have with this is the restorative justice part. The issue I have is saying is equivalating something that might have happened in someone's past to a felony level. After someone has paid their debt to society, I don't understand why we would stop them if they were interested in running for office, because the likelihood is very low. So that's my issue I have, and I'll pass it along.
The only thing I'll add to that is debt to society is one of those things where we think of prison time, but there's often not prison time involved in these sort of misdemeanor, even a Class A misdemeanor offense. And the real debt to society, there really is very little paid, right? There's not much penalty, unfortunately, for domestic violence, which is a huge issue that we should be addressing in Harrisburg, increasing the penalties for domestic violence and ensuring that they really are paying some kind of debt to society for their crimes. But I do think that restorative justice is important. As I said, my mother does criminal civil rights. That's her primary practice. I was raised to always look at restorative justice and would never draft legislation that didn't leave a pathway toward clearing one's record and being eligible to serve once again. And we do have a good expungement system in Pennsylvania whereby after a certain amount of time without committing further offenses, you are eligible for an expungement. And that clears your record entirely. It's as if it never happened. Even prior to a conviction, if you're brought up on charges in Pennsylvania and those charges fall through, you can get a motion to red act to even get the record of the charges in the first place to be removed from the record. So even the record of having been to court, never mind a conviction, can be expunged or red acted in Pennsylvania. So in that regard, we do have good law that can clear someone to run for office again. But I think, if it's within a month or months or a short period of time after a major domestic abuse issue and they're running for office, it's probably fair to disqualify them from running until some time has passed and they have paid that debt.
Thank you. Hillary, your hand's up, right?
It is, but I certainly don't want to dominate this conversation if anyone else wants to jump.
I mean, we have questions, they're valid questions. I have some thoughts, but I'm appreciating this dialogue, so I'm happy to continue if you would like to, please.
Sure. Yeah, just one more thing for me. Is for me in terms of like actually looking at the language that's used in the bill and how it's being advertised. The framing to me feels like it's kind of cloaking what I interpret is actually happening in the bill, which is not only limiting those who have served their debt to society and have chosen to run for and serve in public office, but it's also taking away choice and it's taking away rights from voters at the ballot box. And that seems pretty patently undemocratic. Both like little d and big D. Can you speak on the framing of the bill a little bit?
Sure. If you look at line 15 on page 1, no person sentenced for, and then it lists the number of crimes, and those crimes are already on the books. Embezzlement, public monies, bribery, perjury, or other infamous crimes, those are already there. So we're adding to that physically or sexually abusing a family or household member. But there are other crimes, even non-felonies, as listed here, that would disqualify you. And I think anybody who, had been taken a bribe probably shouldn't serve in public office, at least till they've had that expunged and served their time. And that's kind of protecting the public. Just like preventing domestic abusers from serving in office protects the abuse victims from having to then, when they need a state or federal constituent service issue done, having to call their domestic abuser's office to get that done. That would be a really painful process for anybody, seeing them, in the news, seeing them doing advertisements, seeing them working for use at their door. That would be painful. So I think bribery, perjury, public monies, embezzlement, these are all infamous crimes that we'd want to prevent public officials. We wouldn't want public officials who committed those crimes to be serving us in office, at least until they've gone through the process of, as you say, doing their time and serving their debt to society and then subsequently having the record expunged. I don't think it's too much of a stretch, and I will say stakeholders are generally in favor of this legislation. We've had no stakeholder feedback in opposition, and in general, domestic groups, women's shelters have been supportive of this legislation for the same reasons I outlined. So hopefully that answered your question, but if not, I'm happy to try and elaborate more.
No, thank you.
Thanks. Lisa, did you have anything that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, my list of questions is changing as we talk because I'm getting some answers and coming up with, some different questions. So I'll just ask, so this is going back to what Hillary was just asking about, other prohibitions on serving and serving as an elected official. So, serving as an elected official is a privilege, and as with driving is a privilege, if you have multiple DUIs, say, or something else, you will lose that privilege. And there's a direct linkage. So what I'm looking for here is that direct linkage so that there is consistency and an obvious correlation and not even justification, but just that relatedness between the prohibition, the crime that is causing this ban or prohibition, and what they would be elected to do. So you mentioned the financial crimes, and that seems obvious. And is there, because there is some financial responsibility that we would hold, you know, certainly in some officerships and so forth. So you would not want somebody convicted of a financial crime to be serving in this way. So are there other crimes that you can point to that are non-financial, so are not as obviously linked to the job, to the position,
Sure.
that you can point to?
Without having Title 18 in front of me, it would be difficult because Title 18 is one of the longest statutes I think we have. But it does say, or other infamous crime, and that leaves it open for other infamous crimes which are outlined in Title 18. But without having that list of infamous crimes in front of me, it would be difficult to elaborate further. But there are a number of crimes other than felonies that would disqualify you from serving in public office in Pennsylvania. This would add one to that list. And that would make you ineligible for pretty much every level that you run for, every level that's actually outlined in the state constitution. But that said, I'd be happy to, after this meeting, look into Title 18 and try and get you a comprehensive list.
Thank you.
I guess,
Yeah, go ahead, Tiara.
I guess my question, I guess I'm confused. You know, you made a statement earlier about women not wanting to see their abusers possibly on television or in the paper or something like that. And I mean, that happens anyway, without the conviction or not. I guess I don't know. I'm still not understanding what this is doing for women. It just seems like a lot of talk to make it seem like it's for women, when really the punishment is for those who have been convicted, who've been to prison. And there's no number in there. There's not, well, if they were convicted 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, someone could have been on drugs in their 20s and is a pastor now in their 40s and 50s, and they want to run for office. And according to your bill, they won't be able to. And so I just don't understand why I would, like, who are we to say someone has been rehabilitated? If we believe in the carceral system, we obviously believe somewhat in our legal system because we're working within it. So, I mean, it's just it just doesn't make sense to me to, on one side, say, yeah, we believe in law and order and, you know, people go to jail for things they do. And then on the other side, well, no, if you did that, that's just too much for me to handle. You can't sit next to me on the board. I won't vote for you. I agree with Hillary. You know, give the voters the right, whether or not they want to vote for someone who's been formerly incarcerated. But I also just don't think that we have someone within the COG who's formerly incarcerated. And I don't think that we are just considering all of the factors to this. And this to me opens up a Pandora's box. I know you made some comment about going down a rabbit hole. To me, this is a rabbit hole. We're starting with this, and then we're going to pick and choose what makes people feel more comfortable, and then it's just going to keep going. And I just don't understand why we need to do this. Because honestly, this seems like it's targeted towards a specific individual, because I don't see that many people who are convicted of domestic violence actually running like in that way. So this seems like it's directed towards somebody or something that's currently happening within the world right now, within our current atmosphere right now. Because it's just very direct in the way it's formatted. And I know there's been situations with people running who have been, you know, either heard or convicted, or it's been said about domestic violence here and there across the state. So I guess I don't know. I'm just concerned on how this is going, and I don't like the way it's going.
So,
Thanks, Tiara. I just also want to remind everybody, just so we can include the public when we do discuss this, that we'll try to keep it to questions. I know it's hard because we're just sort of like, part of the getting to the question is sometimes probing the thoughts. So I get that. And it's a deep question. So, but Hillary, and then I also want to sort of like focus on something I think we're kind of keep asking. Maybe I'm hearing in different ways, and I want to see if my understanding's correct about it. But first, please, Hillary.
Yeah, no, thank you,
previous,
Ms. Dennany. I think that's a really good point. And my next question is, before drafting this legislation and then immediately putting it toward boards of supervisors and councils, were there any sort of town halls? Has Representative Conklin done any sort of constituent services in terms of like outreach or polling or anything like that in terms of like how the general public in his district feels about this sort of legislation? Because that I certainly wouldn't want to misrepresent my township, but from my understanding from the folks who I've spoken to, I have not heard very positive feedback from the general public. And so I'm just curious, like, has Representative Conklin actually done outreach?
So let me address the first speaker's question first, and then I think it was Tiara, and then I'll go on to yours, Hillary. First of all, I just wanted to back up a little because there's no mention of serving time in prison or incarceration in the Constitution or in this legislation. It would involve you being sentenced for embezzlement, public monies, bribery, perjury, other infamous crimes, or physical or sexual assault. So the act of being sentenced would disqualify you. You wouldn't actually have to serve in prison. And in fact, for most domestic abuse, there is no prison time, or in most cases, it's not even parole. They're allowed to remain free and clear and continue about their business until there's been a number of charges against them to the point where they have to be convicted due to the severity of the crimes. I'll also say that in Pennsylvania, after 10 years of not being convicted of further crimes, you're eligible for an expungement. I believe it's 10 years. I'll say don't quote me on that because I don't work for Judiciary Committee, but from memory, I think it is 10 years. So there's a pathway currently in law where if you are sentenced and convicted for a crime, assuming that that's not overturned through an appeal and after you've exhausted your appeals, if you stay clean and stay a good upstanding member of society without being charged for further domestic abuse for 10 years, you could get that expunged, and it'd be as if it never happened, both in terms of your actual criminal record when you look online or through the Unified Criminal Database, and in terms of your eligibility to serve in public office. And that also applies to felonies, embezzlement of public monies, bribery, perjury, and the other crimes I mentioned. So there is a pathway forward for anybody who is convicted. And then to speak to the other point, while caucus was unable to give me names legally, there are members of the legislature currently serving who have been sentenced for domestic abuse who still have records. I do not know who those members are. There may be people running. I do not know of anybody in particular running statewide who does, but I know for a fact that there are members who are serving currently in Pennsylvania who would no longer be eligible to serve if this legislation were to pass. And I think that the fact that you can't find that information in the public domain should alarm everybody. It's very difficult to find out if somebody's been sentenced for domestic abuse. And that's why even when we dug into it, while we were confirmed by attorneys that there were individuals, we were unable to find names even with research. So this legislation were it to pass, immediately those people would be ineligible, and we would find out that this person serving as your state rep or state senator or governor or whatever it may be had been a domestic abuser and still had that on their record, hadn't had it expunged, either because they've committed other crimes or were ineligible or because not enough time had elapsed. But it does not require incarceration. And it is important that any legislation we do from our office always offer a path for individuals to have their records expunged and become upstanding members of society. When I grew up in near Graterford Prison in Swanksville, and I grew up there because my mother was a civil rights attorney. And I used to visit a guy in Graterford who was sentenced at 17 for life in prison as an accessory to an armed robbery that went bad. The other individual in the armed robbery committed murder. This individual never held a gun. He was a driver. At 17, he was sentenced for life in prison, which in Pennsylvania really is life without parole. He's now 83, I believe. One of the best men I've ever known. He found God in prison. He got educated in prison. He takes other inmates who are currently incarcerated under his wing and does his best to prepare them for life outside. If he were to be released from prison, I would want someone like that to be eligible to serve in office, because it would be an injustice to us not to have somebody who'd been through that, who'd seen that and done that and been rehabilitated. It would be an injustice to prevent them from serving. So any legislation we do, that I do as Executive Director of the State Government Committee, or that Chairman Conklin does in his role as a legislature, we're always looking to make sure that that door's not closed and that we do have a path for rehabilitation open and a path to serve the public open once you've done your time and had your record expunged. Hopefully that answered the first individual's question, at least to some degree. I'm doing my best here. The second individual, I'm sorry, could you repeat the specific question there?
Hillary, I think that was you. Yeah.
Mute button. No, just in terms of actual like constituent services or public outreach that Representative Conklin has done to like whether it's polling or a town hall or things like that to actually see whether basically my point was like I don't want to misrepresent my township in the way that I vote. But from my understanding with folks that I've spoken to within the new 77th, it's not garnering super positive feedback. And so I'm just wondering if Representative Conklin has actually done any sort of outreach to the public.
So we reached out to stakeholders statewide, and those stakeholders represent women's groups and organizations throughout the Commonwealth, and are there to serve their interests and speak as advocates for women around the country and around the Commonwealth. So we have reached out to them and heard overwhelmingly positive support for this legislation. We've not heard any negative support from anybody, despite circulating this. That said, I truly wish the General Assembly would give us money for polling. That would be amazing. I have never, ever heard of any legislation getting actual public polling done through official funds. Campaigns sometimes do polling, but usually not on specific legislation. I don't think I've ever heard of that happening. But you know, you may have just given me a good legislative idea to enable polling by the General Assembly to find out, you know, how much popular support our legislation does have, and maybe require a certain threshold be reached before that legislation is automatically sent to the floor if it's stuck in committee. You know, if there's 99% approval for something, maybe it should skip committee. So certainly I think there's a lot of improvements that could be made there, and I would love to see polling data. But I know in general, broader polling done by nonprofits has found vast disapproval for any public official convicted of domestic violence or domestic abuse. And I don't know how to state that another way.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to ask a few questions that I feel like I've heard maybe repeated in different ways, or maybe it's just my own misunderstanding. What you were saying is already both felons and some other people who are convicted of certain crimes cannot do what this bill is going to have also domestic violence offenders not be able to do. So there's already this whole group of individuals that have been convicted of a crime that are already not permitted to serve.
That's correct.
Yes.
Although I will just reiterate that if they do have their record expunged, they would be eligible to serve once again.
Right.
So it'd be as if the crime never
Right.
happened. But yeah, there is a list in Title 18 of infamous crimes, and then there are specific crimes
Yeah.
laid out in our state constitution in addition to that.
Which you keep repeating, and I understand. Okay, so just honing it. Okay, because I understand the idea of not pigeonholing people and categorizing them, and like in the, if they have gone through a process within themselves of changing, to not continue to punish them. That I understand. But also I'm having this, which I always do with all the things that I talk about here in this space, is this idea of consistency being really important. And so the question I'm trying to understand is consistency enough here? So for me to say, for my vote eventually, so I'm not trying to form an opinion, but maybe get to a question, right? It seems like the whole system is already geared to do this. It just so happens that domestic violent offenders are left out of that exclusive group of felons and others that aren't allowed to serve. They're just, so to me, my read is that why that group? Why was that group always the left out group in this paradigm that we're already in? So I'm also hearing maybe other supervisors say, other people say, maybe we don't want to be in that paradigm totally, but I see we are there. So for me, if I'm seeing this as domestic violence offenders being left out of this group of others that are included in the group that are prohibited from this act, I'm gonna vote then in favor probably, but like I'm trying to see, is that logically sound what I'm saying there?
I understand what you're saying, and
Okay.
I think you're correct in your assertions there. And I'll add, I guess, or elaborate that the legislation specifically requires General Assembly set definitions, and that way the definitions are not in the state constitution; they're in statute. And that way, definitions for the physical or sexual abuse can change as necessary, and the General Assembly has that ability. Once we put it in the state constitution, as I mentioned, it's really, really tough to put something in the constitution. It's really hard to amend it. So by having that point back at statute, it leaves a little bit more flexibility for the General Assembly to set guardrails that make sense to them and to members of the public in terms of what is severe enough to disqualify you versus what shouldn't disqualify you. Certainly, I think, without going into specific crimes or scenarios, there are certainly domestic abuse, domestic violence crimes that should disqualify you, and perhaps there are lesser ones or lesser misdemeanor degrees that wouldn't. But having it up to the General Assembly to define that gives us some flexibility. But yeah, I think you're right in your read of it, and I can't really speak to why the Constitution's silent on this, other than to say that our Constitution is very old. It was drafted a long time ago, and there's a lot of really
by dudes. There was like the rule of thumb and stuff.
Yeah,
so,
it was
I
done
mean,
a long time ago, and by a lot of, frankly, white men in Harrisburg, which, still the predominant members of Harrisburg, but a lot of, old white men back in the 1800s updated our Constitution. And even now, I mean, if you even look outside the Constitution, which almost never gets updated, look at the election code, which is, as I said, more fluid. There's still mention of torches being required at polling stations in the election code. I don't know about you, but I don't think there's been a torch at a polling station in 100 years or more. But it's still in there because it takes that long to actually make updates just to statute, never mind the Constitution. So I would say the Constitution isn't very flexible and doesn't really change with the times as we'd hope it would.
Understood though. And I appreciate the process that it would be going to the voters. So I also want to just say that if I heard correctly, and this is a question, this has to go through committee and then eventually gets to a ballot, whereupon the public would vote on it before any changes were made.
You're correct. It would have to pass my committee, the State Government Committee. It would have to then pass the House. It would have to go to the Senate. It would have to pass the Senate State Government Committee, pass the Senate at a full vote of the Senate. And then the next subsequent term, which each term's 2 years, the next subsequent term, you'd have to do all that all over again. And then thereafter, the next election that happens, it would be on the ballot, and the voters would get to choose. And if a majority of Pennsylvania voters decided this isn't what they want to do, they'd have that ability because as a constitutional amendment, we get that direct input. Which is unique. We don't have referendum elections in Pennsylvania. We can't do a ballot referendum like in California and collect signatures and force a vote on something. The only time we as voters get to actually directly choose policy is through constitutional amendments that appear on the ballot. So it is unique in that way.
Interesting stuff. Okay, so appreciate your time, and I really appreciate all the answering of questions. As previously stated, it'll be back on our agenda, perhaps for follow-up questions, discussion, and likely a vote at that point. So any final questions before we call it? Okay.
Madam Chair, it could go on
Sure.
for July 5th or July 19th if you'd like it back. If the board would like to give consideration to those 2 dates in July, or I can give you the dates for the August meeting.
I'm sorry, was that a question to me?
No, it was me letting you know the dates of the upcoming 2 meetings.
Okay, great. I mean, unless we need more processing time, I'm guessing the next available agenda time. That's, we're trying to not stay until 11 o'clock at night. So like whatever next means that also would be, I think, the shared goal of the people. So is that okay? So thank you all. Thank you, everybody. I, again, apologize for the mistake and appreciate all the deep thoughts. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
And your presence. Thank you. All right. So let's move on to our next item of unfinished business, which is the status update on the strategic plan update for questions and answers on Chapter 6, introduced by Manager Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am pulling up the agenda as I was checking the next upcoming meeting dates. So provided with the agenda, you will find the latest version of the working document for Chapter 6 of the Strategic Plan Update. For this meeting, it is on the board's agenda for an opportunity to ask questions in terms of status update, in terms of the progress that's been made at this time. It continues to be a work in progress as time permits among the staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of track changes going on in that document. Woo, looks great. Thank you for all that work. Any questions or thoughts from the board or others on the progress of this item? I'm sorry, I've lost Zoom. Hang on. There we go. Lisa.
Thanks. I don't have any questions, and I did have a number of comments particularly on the livable community section, and so I didn't know if you wanted to go through all of those, or it's something I could, or whoever had comments on the sections, we could email them, and then they'd come back for discussion. Because some of my comments are, this needs discussion, so I don't know if we want to get into that.
Why don't you say just like a few things, and then we'll, move it on. Just give us some thoughts while we're here together. Just give us some thoughts that you're having about it.
Yeah, I think under, like I said, under that livable community one, there were a number of the objectives that I thought warranted a little bit more discussion. And overall, I think it looked good. And I think it was just a few items of wording and maybe a few things that are actually decisions that maybe we still need to discuss. So for example, there was one under efficient use of remaining land resources that promotes mixed use development. And I don't know, there is no, underneath there in the action steps, it wasn't defined by zoning district, or there wasn't a lot of, there weren't parameters around that. And, we've had a lot of misses with mixed use districts, like with our PRDs that are half done after, 30 years. So I'm not sure we want that as an objective, overall. So that I thought. And then another action step underneath that was increased density and intensity of use while combined with open space protection. So maybe
It's more accurate, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and I don't know I don't know what zone we would want to necessarily increase density and intensity of use versus what it is now. So I think there's a lot of discussions around some of these very specific action steps that maybe aren't reflected in our zoning update. And so I had a little bit of trouble committing to some of those things that haven't really been defined as policy directives by the board, or like decisions by the board that yes, we're committing to this, the TSD would stand out, but we're just in the process of looking at that zoning district. So I don't know if I want to say here that we need to commit to more intense density when that might not be the outcome of that. And that's the only zoning district I could see that one. And then some things about the municipal brand. That's like rebranding, and there's surveying in there. That's a really big undertaking, so I thought that needed some discussion. And then retain existing and attract prospective businesses and residents. Well, I think retaining existing is good, but attracting prospective residents, I would want some discussion around, because we already have a real housing issue here with affordability. So I don't want to exacerbate that. So that was another one. So there was just a lot of things that were very specific in the action steps that I thought it needed a little bit more discussion before they were finalized in here. One thing I will just say is enhanced safe bike and pedestrian pathways was down at number 7. And I thought that should be at 1 or 2, given the other things that were in that very specific objective. And to add in committing to efforts to secure reliable broadband and internet and cell service throughout the township. So those were just some of the highlights of things. And like I said, it were largely on that one section. I appreciated all that redlining because then you could see what was in there before and after. And I mean, I think overall it looks very good. I think we're in a good place with it. So I can make those make sense and send them on to Centrise.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, Ms. Strickland. And I should also remind the board that when we had this earlier conversation, what direction that I had was to take the items that were listed in the appendix that were provided by staff, recommendations that came by staff and the board members. So, you know, there was a pretty thorough review of that list, and in some ways there were what I would call a little bit of wordsmithing, so we could appropriately categorize objectives into the goals. And the goal statement was wordsmithed a little bit just so it would have a little bit more of a flow and be aligned with some of the overall goals. I absolutely would encourage the board to continue the review and identify which items, if any, you may want to expand or really, as you mentioned, further discuss to determine, is this recommendation, you know, either A, aligned with what the board has in terms of setting goals and objectives and work items, as well as is this the direction to which we want to move forward in general, right? So to your point, we've already initiated the TSD project, and so we might be finding that some of the recommendations that are being discussed as of now in the early stage may actually be different than where we were just in March. So I think it's a great observation. I'm happy to receive all of those comments, and I can begin to flag them for the future discussion when we have a comprehensive update complete.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Lisa, I agree with that mixed use. I really am questioning that. We are going to embark on a lot of mixed use, and I definitely, looking at the zoning map, think that is not the direction that we should be taking at this point in time. The density, the way I interpreted that is differently than you. So I think you're right, like, to talk about it a little bit more. I am concerned about the opportunity for the RR to be developed all across the West End without density and no cluster zoning. And that would be like really hugely changing the entire environment. So I think the way I'm reading that density is to really think about the regional growth boundary. And I think all of that came from the previous goal that was called something about growth management. So I think it's a reasonable strategy, but like we're doing it with the TSD or TTD, I'm sorry. We're like doing that and then maybe not doing it with how our zoning is set up. So I also have a few comments on the environmental stewardship section. Just are parks sort of in a different area then? Were they shifted to a different goal area or?
Well, that's a great observation and question, Madam Chair. I'm trying to recall now from the appendix section. I don't recall there being a lot of recommendations on parks specifically from staff and or board members.
Yeah.
That very well could be an oversight on my end, but I don't recall those recommendations. But
I think I had some in there. I hope that was the draft I sent the consultant. I'll sort of backtrack that. But I think the answer to the question is like, it would still be in this section. I think the question is, if parks were appearing in this, it's going to be in that environmental stewardship section, not like a livable community. Like, we did some changing of categories,
Yes, Madam
Okay.
Chair. I would say like the green infrastructure policy, the park management regarding invasives policies.
Okay.
Yes. It would fall in environmental.
Okay. All right. So I'll just
I'll come back
look
through.
into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts, just general thoughts, comments on the draft? Okay, seems like that's it. Thank you so much, Centrise, board members, everybody, for your contributions. And we are on to new business. First up is the consent agenda. We've got some contracts on there. I would accept a motion to approve the consent agenda.
This is Patty. I move that we accept the consent agenda that's listed in the agenda.
This is Lisa, I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. And next up is a proclamation to support and promote June as Immigrant Heritage Month of 2022. This will be introduced by Supervisor Strickland. Lisa.
Thank you. So provided with the agenda is a proclamation to support and promote June as Immigrant Heritage Month of 2022. And I want to note that we may have Shobha Siva Prasad Wadia, I hope I did okay with that, Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Penn State with us, and who brought this forward to the board. And I'll just note I'm so pleased to be able to introduce this item. My mother moved to the United States in her 20s and was a permanent resident and green card holder for the rest of her life. So knowing her experience as I do, it's just really rewarding for me to be able to read this proclamation, which I will bring up. So the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, to support and promote June as Immigrant Heritage Month of 2022. Whereas generations of immigrants from around the world built our country's economy and created the unique character of our nation, and whereas immigrants enriched the schools, businesses, neighborhoods, and communities in Ferguson Township, and whereas immigrants grow businesses, innovate, strengthen our economy, and create jobs in Ferguson Township, and whereas immigrants lead faithfully in securing rights and access to equal opportunity for all Americans, creating a fairer and more just society, and whereas despite these countless contributions, the undervalued role of immigrants in building and enriching our nation, state, and community throughout our history continues to the present day. Now, therefore, be it resolved by Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors that June is recognized as Immigrant Heritage Month in Ferguson Township, Center County of Pennsylvania, proclaimed this day, the 21st of June, 2022. And I'd like to welcome Shobha to share a few words.
Thank you, and for the introduction too. My name is Shobha Sivaprasad Wadia, and I am a 14-year resident of Ferguson Township, and a mother of two in the school district, as well as a law professor at Penn State Law, where I direct the Center for Immigrants' Rights Clinic. And it's really an honor to share a few remarks about this proclamation and to see Ferguson Township issue it. The last time I spoke before the Board of Supervisors was in regard to a proclamation and reaction to a drumbeat of measures in the last administration that was focused on excluding and denying immigrants from Muslim-majority countries and increasing immigration enforcement against those already here. So it is quite refreshing to be here tonight to talk about a proclamation that is centered on celebrating immigrants. Since June 2014, Immigrant Heritage Month has given people across the United States an opportunity to explore their own heritage and celebrate the shared diversity that forms the unique story of America. Additionally, Immigrant Heritage Month is a moment to consider how immigrants are marginalized, how history informs this marginalization, and our collective responsibility to ensure immigrants in our community and in Ferguson Township feel welcomed and with the tools to thrive. The welcoming by so many in our community was really showcased this past year when looking at the welcoming to members of families in the wake of humanitarian crises in the Ukraine and in Afghanistan. At the Center for Immigrants' Rights Clinic, which I direct, my teaching goal is for students to gain the skills required to be effective immigration attorneys and advocates. This requires a shared understanding of immigration law, policy, and politics. Since 2008, the clinic has provided high-quality representation and work product in the areas of immigration policy for nonprofits, community partnerships and projects such as with the Borough of State College and the Police Department, as well as legal support in individual cases such as for detained immigrants in Pennsylvania and those seeking asylum or protection as an immigrant survivor. State College broadly and Ferguson Township specifically is home to many immigrants across the ethnic and economic spectrum. Doctors, dishwashers, students, agricultural workers, scholars, teachers, refugees, and restaurant owners. Together, residents in State College enrich our schools, economy, places of worship, and culture. Thank you again for issuing this proclamation and for recognizing the contributions of immigrants in our community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shobha. Thank you, Lisa. Looks like it has come time for me to call for a motion, which you can find in your agenda.
This is Hillary. I move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the proclamation to support and promote June as Immigrant Heritage Month of 2022.
This is Patty. I'll second.
Thank you. All right. Is there any other discussion? Any comments? All right. Thank you again so much, Shobha, for the work that you do, for your contributions to our community. Thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. All right, with that, let's call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. And motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, next up, we have a public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing a policy that requires the implementation of a multi-factor authentication for staff and local and regional authorities, boards, and commissions. This will be introduced by our Township Manager, Centrise Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Provided with the agenda packet is a copy of the resolution, which includes a copy of the multi-factor authentication policy as Exhibit A for review and consideration by the board. Also presented to the board at the previous meeting for discussion. Also provided with the agenda is a recommended motion for the board's consideration.
Thank you so much, and this is a public hearing, so I will open the floor to anyone in the public should they care to comment on the item. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
This is Sierra. I move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, establishing a policy that requires the implementation of a multi-factor authentication for staff and local and regional authorities, boards, and commissions.
This is Hillary. I second.
Thank you. And this is the resolution, so this will be a roll call vote. Centrise, if you would do the roll call for us, thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is roll call vote, resolution number 2022-12. Ms. Deneni?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes?
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. And we'll move on to the Farmstead View Subdivision Preliminary Plan introduced by Mr. Jeff Ressler, Zoning Administrator. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in your packet, you have the narrative. I can read that. On July 29, 2021, Pentair Engineering submitted a preliminary plan on behalf of their client, Farmstead Developer LLC. The parcel is located at 139 Farmstead Lane, tax parcel 24-22-306, and it is zoned single-family residential R1. Parcel currently is 3.03 acre lot, is a 3.03 acre lot, and the applicant is proposing to subdivide this lot into 7 lots. There will be 1 stormwater retention lot and 6 single-family residential lots. On April 19, 2022, the Board of Supervisors conducted a conditional use hearing on Lot 1, 103 Farmstead Drive to permit the creation of a flag lot and denied the modification application request for the preservation of 20% of the existing eligible tree canopy on site, 22.515.d.2 at that same meeting. As a result of the denial of the modification request, Lot 2 was amended to accommodate and protect a 27-inch DBH red pine tree with a retaining wall. These alterations require modifications to slope requirements of Chapter 21, Appendix A, Streets and Sidewalks. The maximum driveway grade at any point on the driveway is 15%. The slope of the proposed drive for Lot 2 will not exceed 18%. The administration and enforcement of Chapter 21, Streets and Sidewalks, is delegated to the Director of Public Works. Upon review of the request, the Director is in favor of the modification request, subject to inclusion of release from liability language on the recorded plan. The Planning Commission reviewed the plan at the June 13, 2022 regular meeting and recommended approval to the Board of Supervisors. Additionally, Planning Commission expressed concerns about the tree preservation and protection ordinance in relation to the enforcement feasibility and recommended that the board authorize planning and zoning staff and the new township arborist to review Chapter 22, 515, tree preservation and protection, now that it has been put into practice. Staff has reviewed the plan and is recommending approval pending outstanding staff comments. And the recommended motion would be that the Board of Supervisors grant approval of the Farmstead View preliminary plan pending outstanding staff comments as included in the memorandum dated June 14th, 2022 from the Director of Planning and Zoning. Any questions for me at this time?
Jeff, thank you. I have one. So there's one driveway that's not going to be 15% and it's going to be 18%. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And we, the board, didn't have to do anything. That just is going to happen within this plan.
My understanding is that the administration of that part is delegated to Dave Modriger, Public Works
Gotcha.
Director.
Yep. Cool.
Yep.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. The retaining wall around the tree. How much space does the tree have, and how high is the retaining wall?
Hi, Laura. This is Mark.
Mark.
I just joined us. I came from another meeting, so I just got here.
Welcome.
Yeah, because to allow us to steepen the driveway up, and then we pretty much have a 1 foot retaining wall, kind of. Yeah, that's why steepening the driveway up, and then what else we're doing internally with the building is typically between the garage and the first floor, there's 1 or 2 steps. We're going to have to add 4 to 5 steps. That way, the garage is still down lower with a steep slope, but then the back of the house can be raised up closer to the tree elevation. And so it's this little
Just for the
foot-
one lot,
Yes,
there.
correct,
Yeah.
yeah. And then,
Gotcha.
yeah, and then the, that little wall was right beyond the drip line of the tree there. And like it says, this way.
Right
allows
beyond
us
the
to-
drip line, okay,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
gotcha.
This allows us to just have a little, it can be just a couple, flat stones or just a big stone wall. You don't need any reinforcement behind it, so it's minimal damage.
Good. Totally my line of questioning there. You hit all the points. Great.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Good. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I think those might be my only questions. I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the board. Does anyone have any questions about the preliminary plan? The percentage driveway change, that's minor. Obviously, Dave Mudricker is fine with it. Any other questions? Any questions from Lisa? I don't see any cubes with your hand in them.
Nope, no questions. You answered them.
All right, okay. Looks like that's it. I guess side comment, I'm not at all ready to review the tree preservation ordinance. We've got a lot of ordinances. Is that the plural of ordinance, or is it like ordinance I or something? Ordinances. We've got a lot of ordinance that need reviewing, like more, like lighting ordinance, right? We just recently talked about how we're changing the standards for that to be more dark sky compliant. Like the noise ordinance. So I'm not saying in the future that might not be a priority, but like this is the first application of it, so I don't think we're quite there yet. That would be my thought on that. So if anybody has other thoughts, they could share them. Bill Keogh, you're muted, sir.
Hi, this is Bill Keogh, and I, of course, as you all know, serve on the Planning Commission. We were not necessarily interested in reviewing the whole tree ordinance and all of those things. However, we did uncover an issue with the tree ordinance that we felt needs to be addressed a little more timely. And that issue has to do with the fact that this protection of this particular tree is in perpetuity, forever. And in fact, we all know that trees don't live forever. And in talking about that issue, we also realized that the township doesn't really have any guidance in the ordinance for tracking of this preservation. And we wanted to at least discuss that issue and try and tweak, not greatly change, but tweak the existing ordinance as we applied its first iteration in this particular subdivision. And that was the reason for bringing that up in this ordinance. We found two things. We don't want to lose those two things. They're minor things, but we don't want to lose them in the course of time, and probably would ask for some staff time to help us just work through it and get the tweak to you in a timely manner.
Thanks, Bill. I agree with that. Like, why have an ordinance without enforcement or like tracking of it? So that makes a lot of sense. So thanks for the clarification. I think though, isn't it true though, that like in a land development plan without the tree preservation ordinance, like if you have a land development plan and you have trees and shrubs on your land development plan, you are obligated in perpetuity to maintain those trees and shrubs or get an amendment to your land development plan. And if they die, you have to replant them. So I think that's how our ordinance works. And I think that we don't track that either. So you can have somebody like a Unimart have a bunch of really nice pine trees that they get a whim where they want to cut them all down, and nobody is going to maybe notice. But if a concerned citizen maybe makes a complaint, and then they identify it on the land development plan, and then there's a legal standing to have the entity replant, if I understand like how that all plays out. Jeff, is that kind of like, do I have it even remotely correct of how that works with land development law?
Yes, you do. In fact,
Okay.
you do. We do not typically go out and patrol to look for things like this. Typically, they're brought to us by complaint, but we can ask someone to put back in what was on the plan. They have to actually do that, and they do. So, yeah.
So like this is different because they're not maybe going to replant a heritage tree or a preserved tree. But my point, the similar thing is the not tracking. So whether it's like a preserved tree, right? Is that what Bill's saying? Like there's not any kind of and also in perpetuity for a preserved tree, it's probably once it's dead, it's no longer considered to be a thing, right? Because it's not.
Well, that's part of the problem, Chair, that we ran into as we discussed the issue, because there are a lot of things that could happen to this tree that will result in its demise. The other thing in tracking that we were concerned about is not the current owner. In fact, not even the next owner. But if it's in perpetuity, we're talking about maybe 40, 50 years from now, when none of our staff is present, our current staff, and when a bank does, or a potential new buyer does a title search, they do a title search. They don't do a land development plan search. And so this stuff kind of gets lost as it gets out in the future, and we don't have any wording that might address how to handle.
Is there no easement? Is there no easement filed that would be turned up in something like that?
In this particular case, we're not talking about a tree preservation. We're talking about meeting the ordinance requirement for 20% of the
Yeah, we're kind of like
existing
getting off the
trees.
topic, so you're right. So we should probably stick to this, but yeah, so I feel like I'm still probably maybe in the place where I don't know if I would prioritize that, but we're going through a prioritization with the manager, so maybe it would rise up if it seemed really important, but I kind of feel maybe like in perpetuity in this case, like if lightning strikes, that's just gonna be it. So, but we can, I don't know, maybe there will be things to follow up with. But in this case, for this particular plan, it's preserved. We've got a small wall to preserve it. There's a minor slope change. It worked out. I do wonder if there's a deed restriction happening. Can Mark answer that? Is there a deed restriction? Is this on somebody's property? Is this an HOA owned space?
That's a good question. At this point in time, we haven't explored that. I thought at this point in time it was going to be on that property owner, but at the same time, it's something that that property owner may consider to request that be a heritage tree. And if that's the case, I think it goes on to the townships. It depends on whoever buys the lot, but I think they were talking at the moment, my client hasn't completed the HOA drawings because this is just still a preliminary plan, but they were
Okay, so there's some questions. Okay, so we're going to work through it on this one, start to, and maybe put it on the longer term to-do list. It's a big to-do list, so I just can't promise anything in terms of priorities, Bill. You guys already have like 100 things to work on, maybe, so.
Chairman Danini, the Planning Commission clearly recommended approval. We were not wanting this issue to hold up this particular request.
Yeah, awesome. Great. With that, I would, if I didn't already, entertain the motion you find in your agenda. Thank you, Bill, much. Did I already entertain the motion? No.
I don't think so. Did you? No? Okay.
No.
Okay, this is Lisa. I'll move that the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors grant approval of the Farmstead View Preliminary Subdivision Plan pending outstanding staff comments as included in the memorandum dated June 14th, 2022 from the Director of Planning and Zoning.
This is Patty, I'll second.
Thank you. Any further questions on this particular plan? All right, and thoughts for the future? All present, all there. Okay, so let's call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Mark, for working through that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next one here. I am going to be recusing myself. Just take a moment. Lisa and I will both be recusing ourselves. Just taking a moment. It's not because there's any financial gain involved with this. The farmers market is something that she and I both serve on the steering committee where we volunteer our time and get no dollars, but we do love it. So we're going to remove ourselves from this discussion. And I believe that Centrise and Patty will be introducing, or Centrise or Patty will be introducing this item. So with that, before I even read the title, Centrise, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll mute myself and I'll close my video out. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Chair Deneni mentioned, the next item up is a consideration of a financial contribution toward the Pine Grove Mills Farmers Market in support of local government. It has been, of course, as mentioned by Chair Deneni, it has been brought to the Chair's attention, as she mentioned, that the two members wish to recuse themselves from deliberation and voting on this item to avoid the appearance of a conflict. So we understand that Supervisor Deneni and Supervisor Strickland will not be discussing or voting on this item. Are there any questions on that? Okay, thank you. So moving into the agenda item, the Pine Grove Mills Farmers Market opened on June 9th of this season, and will continue hosting on Thursdays, I believe, from 3 to 7 p.m. until September 29th, 2022. As a local venue that supports small businesses, this farmers market is organized and managed by local residents for the community and is an example of economic development. Provided with the agenda packet is a copy of the donation form requesting a contribution in the amount of $3,000. The board is asked to give consideration for a financial contribution, which I do want to point out is allocated in the 2022 operating budget. Last year during discussion for the 2022 operating budget, it was recommended and decided at the time that the board would create a line item specifically for the Pine Grove Mills Farmers Market. Unfortunately, the contribution was added in with the funds allotted toward economic development. Therefore, the process is that a donation request is submitted to the township, and anything over $500 per policy comes in front of the board. So I wanted just to provide a little bit of clarification as to why this particular contribution is in front of the board. And future years, however, will move in the path to which was discussed and approved as part of our discussions in 2021. With that said, I'm happy to answer any questions on this item. And if there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion, which is provided in the agenda packet.
This is Patty. I move that the Board of Supervisors authorize an appropriation in the amount of $3,000 as a financial contribution to support the 2022 Pine Grove Mills Farmers Market.
This is
Go for it. You're good. You're good.
This is Sierra. I second that motion.
Okay, is there any discussion?
Just to say how much I love this, and I'm so pleased that like they offered the vouchers, etc., to our authorities, boards, and commission as a thank you. So I'm happy to do this. I think it's a real community building and supportive events endeavor.
Yes, thank you. I will say on behalf of staff, we were happy to organize and facilitate that partnership and be able to provide that token of appreciation to all of our members serving on the authorities, boards, and commissions. So thank you to the board for seeing that through. We appreciate that. All right, so I'll take a vote. Oh yeah, so I'll just move into a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay. All right, we have a unanimous vote. Thank you. We'll close the discussion officially, and I'll hand it back over to Chair Denny.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Next item is discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion as a special report item included in the agenda order of business. This will be introduced by Ms. Martin.
You again, Madam Chair. So the Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution establishing the agenda order of business for 2022, as the board does annually. As part of the agenda order of business, it includes, this year, we included the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI special report item, which was new and not in previous, not on previous agendas. Staff recognizes the opportunity to foster an inclusive community by increasing awareness on the broad diversity of residents that represent many different racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. It is anticipated, of course, that the board will continue to work to ensure that our diverse communities are well represented in policy discussions and actively celebrate the multi-ethnic and cultural backgrounds within Ferguson Township. We also acknowledge that we have had and happy to have a number of requests for proclamations. Staff's given a lot of consideration to identify ways that we might be able to more proactively identify ways that we can celebrate the multi-ethnic cultural backgrounds and religious and different diverse celebrations that, again, represent the community, the representation within our community. So with that, we bring to the board, we propose to the board a diversity, equity, and inclusion special item that's reflected in a calendar that we are proposing for the board to give consideration. Staff's also willing and prepared to present a drafted version of this calendar that I'm describing, that I have no reference to at this point. There are no other municipalities that currently do this. So this is really just a new idea for the board's consideration. Staff's happy to draft something and bring it back to the board for consideration and discussion for the July 19th meeting. The goal then would be that the board would vote to have a finalized calendar, that staff then would refer to this calendar and add to the DEI section for all future agendas, that there would be that reflection of whatever is being celebrated on the calendar into the agenda in the DEI section. And of course, as you all are aware, as discussed at a previous meeting, the township is soon kicking off the organizational assessment and the township audit. And as part of that, we also we'll look to have some recommendations on ways the township can integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion in our practices and our operations. Until then, we thought this was something the board could give some consideration to. Thank you.
Thank you, Centrise. I think it's a great idea. Thoughts, comments, discussion, elaboration?
No, I'm with you. I think this is a great idea.
I agree, and I would hope that it'd be something we can be a reference to in the region. If nobody else has a calendar like this, I would hope that it can be shared maybe at the general forum meetings, a matter of record, that people can go to this and access this information. I think it's exciting and a great idea.
Okay, great.
Winner, winner, winner. Okay, so there's a motion in your agenda.
This is Sierra. I recommend that the Board of Supervisors direct staff to develop a draft calendar that proposes diversity, religious, and ethnic holidays, cultural celebrations, and local events to add to the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative.
This is Hillary. I second.
Thank you. Any further conversation? Seeing none, this will just be a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. All right. Next item is the acceptance of a retirement resignation from Chris Albright, Chief of Police, Ferguson Township, and this will be introduced by Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Provided with the agenda is a retirement announcement letter from Chief of Police Chris Albright, who has served Ferguson Township for 30 years. It is put in front of the board for the board to accept his retirement resignation. And he will be with us for a couple of more months, and we're so happy to have him until he confirms a date to which will begin his retirement. He's with us this evening as well. I also would like to hand it over to the chair of the Board of Supervisors for some additional commentary.
Thank you so much, Centrise. Happy to have you here tonight, Chief, and to have benefited from your long term of service to Ferguson Township. When I was thinking about what to say tonight, I was like looking at the agenda, looking at the narrative to try to anchor the conversation, and like, there's not a lot there. I'm a terrible public speaker, but you know, this really, it's not about me. And I know, I acknowledge that I really can't fill the space with words because I know from what I have observed and heard and seen what an incredible asset that you have been to this community. And just, we thank you for that service. I debated if I was going to tell a story or not, like my interaction with the police story. But I guess I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to just tell a brief story. So hopefully I'm not revealing too much just about myself. So when I was first elected, you know, my friends were illegally occupying a space. So it was like a little contentious as a board member to be in that particular space because, you know, it's illegal and you're serving as a board member. So the day did come where, you know, my friends were asked to leave and perhaps not going to leave that space. And I remember going to the place and, you know, the chief showed up, and I remember saying, you know, thank you for being here. Because I knew that when he arrived, that there was going to be a deceleration of that situation where there were people that I really cared about, and that, you know, I was worried about. So, that, you know, it was a difficult situation for me to be in, you know, because my friends were facing potential arrest if they didn't leave peacefully. But I can't even imagine the kind of a situation that it was for the chief to be encountering that. And I know that is somewhat minor in terms of a lot of the kinds of situations that the chief and other police officers deal with on a regular basis. But I really felt like that interaction and how that was handled was a testament to the leadership of Chief Albright, where it's very heartfelt and he cares a lot about the community and the outcomes. And it's always been really self-evident, and even in the high conflict situation like that. So I guess I would say thank you for that and for everything that you've done. And I guess we'll have to accept your letter of resignation or retirement, and wish you well in enjoying the fun and fun and adventures that we know you're going to enjoy. So with that, I would certainly open it up if you wanted to say anything. But
Just
no pressure.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate those kind words. Lots of good stories come to my mind too. But I've enjoyed working with the township residents, stakeholders for the last 30 years. It's get to interact with a lot of great people doing great things. I've had a lot of great business and personal relationships that I've developed over the years. Many of those I hope to continue. Some of those, will probably, kind of fall off a little bit because I'll just be in different roles somewhere along the line. Ferguson Township's always been like a family to me. Now, adding a little humor, sometimes maybe that family you don't always want to see, but, still family. But I said, I just appreciate the opportunity that I've had over the last 30 years.
Thank you so much. We are definitely the lucky ones. So, what do I have to do here? Accept a motion, don't I? Okay. I would entertain the motion you find in your agenda.
This is Patty. I move that the Board of Supervisors accept the retirement resignation of Ferguson Township Chief of Police.
This is Lisa. I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments or thoughts?
And Laura, I'll just add.
Lisa, yeah.
I'll just echo your thanks. And that's so many years of dedication and service to this community. It's really, we can't thank you enough for that effort that you've put out for all of us. And I think your service as a leader is also represented in the different things you've been involved in. I was thinking through the advances in the crisis intervention training, the improvements in protocols for drug overdoses that you were involved in, and even the activities like Shop with a Cop and the fire safety events, so just getting out there with the community. So these are lasting impressions and advancements that you've made here, and I just want to extend that appreciation to you, that it's made such an impression and a difference here, and we're sorry and sad to see you go, but very happy for you and your new adventures. So thank you.
Absolutely. Lisa's so much better at words than me. Oh my God. Lisa, you're going to be a great chair. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. It's so true. All those years of dedication. Can't even imagine it. Thank you. All right. So we have a motion and a second on the table. I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next up, board member request a proclamation on Juneteenth Day of Observance 2022, introduced by Ms. Williams, Supervisor. Tiara.
Hi, thank you. So with the agenda, there's a proclamation to identify the day that that marks the emancipation of the last enslaved individuals. There's a typo in the thing, so we'll fix that. Last enslaved individuals in the South. And June 19th has been long celebrated by former enslaved people and is now celebrated throughout the country. And from the emancipation of slavery. And so I'll read this proclamation. 2022 Juneteenth Day of Observance, June 20, 2022, whereas the legacy of the enslavement of Black Americans in the United States until 1865 is a legacy that will always negatively permeate into the fabric of this nation's founding, present times, and its future. And whereas as students of history, it is incumbent upon all Americans to recognize the failures in human rights, dignity, and equality that were placed upon Black Americans by white Americans during that era of history. And efforts must always be made to educate those unaware of these atrocities, work to prevent racial prejudice, and always consciously attempt to heal the wounds on the Black American community. And whereas this is why it is important for America to commemorate the holiday and traditions forged by Black Americans in Galveston, Texas, who were the first locality to celebrate Juneteenth, a celebration beginning in 1865, rooted in the freedom from slavery within the final state of the Confederate Texas, finally abolishing the wretched institution. And whereas this formal recognition of Juneteenth as a recognized holiday serves as a testament to the efforts being made by governing bodies across the United States towards acknowledgement of the atrocities of the past, but also works to honor the courage and sacrifice of abolitionist civil rights leader and all Black Americans who fought for their freedom and survival as a community and celebrate their freedom from a vile institution. And now, therefore, the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors does hereby designate the date of June 20, 2022 as the 2022 Juneteenth Day of Observance, and urges all township residents to honor this day, honor this holiday, its history, and to continually put their efforts towards creating a fair, more equal society for Black Americans now and in the future. Proclaim this 21st day of June 2022. So, back to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Tiara. You'll find a motion in your agenda, and I will entertain that at this point.
This is Hillary. I move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the proclamation on Juneteenth Day of Observance for 2022.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
This is Patty. I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion or comments? Thank you very much for bringing this to us. And those are my only comments. So.
Oh, I do want to acknowledge that Ferguson Township is or was the only one that actually closed yesterday in honor of Juneteenth. And so hopefully some municipalities as well as the school board follows. I know there was some conversation about that happened yesterday. So I just wanted to acknowledge Ferguson Township for that.
Awesome. Very good point. All right. We do have a motion and a second, so I will call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. And motion passes unanimously. Next up is board member request, a proclamation on Jewish American Heritage Month of May in 2022, introduced by Ms. Caldwell, Supervisor. Hillary.
Happy June 21st, everybody. The proclamation for May. So provided with the agenda is a draft proclamation to recognize the Jewish American Heritage Month of 2022. I would just like to take a really brief moment to acknowledge the board and staff and township for including and drafting this proclamation. My Jewish heritage has informed much of how I navigate the world and how I approach civic engagement in terms of social justice and equity and governance. Tikkun Olam, which is healing the world, and tzedek, justice, are two tent poles of Jewish activism. And I'm just so grateful and humbled to work alongside all of you and to stand in solidarity with every community that fights against discrimination and hate. So without further ado, here is the proclamation for 2022 Jewish American Heritage Month. Whereas Jewish American heritage has roots stemming as far back as 1654, where a ship carrying Jewish religious refugees arrived near present-day New York City, and who, like other early colonial settlers, were escaping religious persecution in Europe. And whereas in local Center County history, the historical legacy of Jewish Americans can be found as far back as 1786 in nearby Aaronsburg, which is thought to be the first settlement in Pennsylvania and possibly in the United States to be founded by someone of Jewish heritage, Aaron Levy, who also valiantly fought in the Revolutionary War as an American. And whereas these stories of early Jewish Americans, though not often included in the history of early American settlers, speak to the concept of the American dream, where America welcomes the tired, the poor, and those yearning to breathe free, a chance to find work, life, and new possibilities in the United States. And whereas with this legacy beginning in 1654, Jewish Americans have gone on to contribute to some of America's greatest cultural, scientific, and artistic achievements and strengths, and have also forever ingrained their celebrations, literature, and cuisine into the larger American life, while also keeping their identity and their traditions alive in the face of virulent anti-Semitism and, most importantly, the Holocaust. And now, therefore, the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors does hereby designate the month of May 2022 as National Jewish American Heritage Month in Ferguson Township, and urges all township residents to join with the Township Board of Supervisors in recognizing the substantial contributions and culture Jewish Americans have brought to the world, and condemns all forms of anti-Semitism and hate unto our Jewish American neighbors and fellow Americans.
Thank you so much. You will find a recommended motion in your agenda, which I'll entertain at this point.
This is
This is
Patty.
Sierra. Oh, go ahead, Patty.
This is Patty. I move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the proclamation to recognize Jewish American Heritage Month, May 2022.
This is Sierra. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? Again, thank you. It's a really lovely proclamation. Okay. With that, let's call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. I have once again lost my agenda. There it is. Okay. We are down to communications to the board. Any communications to the board?
I had two.
Oh. Patty, was that you?
No, Lisa has two and I have one. Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay.
Great.
They're quick. I had a complaint. Somebody said that the workers are beginning early at the construction site at Buckoughton College. And it's been a repeated occurrence. I think this has probably been brought forward before, but it's continuing. Okay, and Chief is nodding his head. And so I think there's been work to try to figure that out. So the second one is one I referenced earlier. I had a communication that bicyclists are not always stopping at the bike path crossing at Bachman Lane along Valley Vista. So, so I wanted to bring that forward. I'm not sure, and this is something too that I'll bring forward at the Lucy committee, because it's so close to Patton too, but I'm not sure what the signage is there, if that needs to be enhanced, and what other intersections this is a problem at.
I had a resident reach out to me asking about the Farmstead Park and when the playground equipment would be freed from the tape that surrounds it or whatever. I did briefly discuss with Dave Modricker, and there's just a few items left. There was a problem with the poured surface, etc., and some other issues. But he said he would follow up with me, and I can reach back out to the resident once I hear from him.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you. Any others? Looks like that's it. All right. We're on to calendar items. We've got Juneteenth recently observed, July 4th coming up, coffee and conversations at the Naked Egg, and hey, the Pine Grove Mills Farmers Market every Thursday, 3 to 7 at St. Paul, west end of Pine Grove Mills. Route 45 Getaways is coming up. Lots of good shows to see and things to do. So that'll be fun. But we'll have some meetings before then. And then we've got our usual suspects down there. So if anyone has anything to add, this is the time. All right. We've come to adjournment. So if nothing else, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We're adjourned.
Good night.
Good night.
That was a heavy meeting. What do you mean? Thank you. Lots of heavy topics.
Yeah. Oh, bed. I'm glad it's not late. I would have